All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Leah Desher. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Education Outreach Specialist for DHPSNY. Before we jump in, I just have a couple of very quick tech housekeeping notes to mention. If you have any sound or technical questions or issues today, just let me know in the chat box with a direct message, and I'll do my best to help you out. And this webinar is being recorded, and the recording as well as a couple of extra resources are going to be sent out to all of our registrants within the next week or so. So I want to kick things off by sharing a little bit about the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services for New York program, as well as our work with ARIA Strategies. So DHPSNY, as we like to call it, is a collaboration between the New York State Archives and the New York State Library, services provided by the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. DHPSNY is a statewide program that provides free planning and education services to support the vast network of collecting institutions, such as archives, libraries, historical societies, museums, and all other organizations that safeguard and ensure access to New York's historical records and library research materials. DHPSNY services include archival needs assessments, preservation and condition surveys, strategic planning assistance, and access to a variety of educational programs, such as this webinar. So if you'd like to learn more about any of our services, you can check out our website at DHPSNY.org. So now, to situate this program within the larger context of work being done at the state level, the State Education Department is overseen by the New York State Board of Regents. In April of 2021, the Board of Regents offered their framework on diversity, equity, and inclusion in New York schools, and subsequently issued their culturally responsive sustaining education framework. So this series of webinars and dialogues that DHPSNY is doing is an effort on behalf of the State Archives and the State Library to extend the work of the Board of Regents into the cultural heritage community and address these issues in the context of collecting organizations across the state. Because DHPSNY is positioned as a resource and a connector for cultural heritage organizations throughout New York, we've recognized that it's important for our efforts to be more actively engaged in doing and fostering anti-racism work within this field. So for this reason, we've been working with ARIA Strategies to get a sense of what type of work our constituents are already doing, where folks like you are interested in further developing their learning all throughout the state. So ARIA Strategies is a firm that provides mission-driven solutions for nonprofits based in Rochester, New York. And we're really grateful to have ARIA facilitating this program today, as well as our presenters, Lavada and Jordan, who will be introducing themselves in just a little bit. And so before I pass things over to Aria, I just wanted to give a super quick content warning. This webinar does contain some graphic descriptions of enslavement and some out-of-date language about race in what is now New York State. So just make sure that you practice some self-care. Feel free to pop out if you need to. Do whatever you need to take care of yourselves. And so with that, I'm going to pass things over to Aria to set the space for us.
Thank you, Leah. Hey, everybody. It's so good to be back with you again for another program. I am very excited to be here. And before we set the space, I just want to invite folks to participate in those check-ins that we put some links in. We're just trying to get a sense for what folks are up to. And after we set the space, I am going to go ahead and show you your responses. So go ahead and click those links, and we'll revisit those after I set the space. So let's see. We every time we get together, we go over our norms and agreements. These are norms and agreements that the DHPSNY constituent community created in January of 2022. And so they're flexible. They're meant to meet our needs, to create a container where we all know what's happening and we all know what the expectations of this learning container are. So first and foremost, lead with love. Remember, this is a journey. Drop the mic or step up, step back, meaning if you're a person who likes to contribute to conversation, pause and step back. And if you're a person who typically steps back, pause and give yourself permission to speak up in this space. Speak for yourself and your own story. Foster inclusion and respect. Give each other mutual positive regard. Use direct communication. Come to the space teachable. Open your mind. Really listen. Went too far. Stay engaged. speak your truth, experience discomfort. Let's see. Expect and accept non-closure. Ask questions in the chat or message us directly. Be responsible for what you hear. Use I statements. Assume best intent. And most importantly, love each other into education. So again, if you have anything you want to update or amend, go ahead and put that in the chat and we'll pull that into our norms and agreements for today. Our objective today is really to just gain a deeper understanding about anti-racist approaches to collections accessibility. And we're going to use the New York State Archives Partnership Trust Consider the Source as our example and case study. So really looking at how can we, as collecting organizations and the people who power them, make it so as many folks as possible have access to what we have in our collections. Today, we're going to get an overview of enslavement in New York State from the wonderful Lavada Nahan. We're going to get an introduction to Consider the Source from the wonderful Jordan Jace. And then Jordan and I are going to have a conversation about anti-racist approaches to collections accessibility using Consider the Source. We'll have time for questions and some practice, and then we'll talk about next steps and action items. So just like all of these anti-racism programs that we're experiencing together, today's structure is really about building community, sharing information, discussion, debrief, and making plans for the futures of ourselves as practitioners and our organizations as repositories. We're going to probe what it means to use an anti-racism lens to make our collections more accessible. We're going to ask questions and get comfortable with discomfort. You can expect to feel uncomfortable, curious, frustrated, heard, confused, and surprised. So all those things when we're doing anti-racism in the cultural heritage sector. Let's see, before we do our introductions, I just want to take a quick look at those check-ins. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, another screen. We've got, what do we got here? This question, it's going to load up. How does your organization make their collection accessible? So we've got some folks saying that they're open by appointment. Some folks just have open hours. We've got one person says digitize. That's awesome. Let's see. And I'm going to go to the next one, which talks about, like, it asks you to rank like where anti-racist approaches are reflected in your organization. So let's take a quick look at that. Let's see. All right, so first we've got reflected in policies, which is awesome. We've done some really cool programs and webinars around how do you infuse anti-racism into your policy. So I'm super excited about that. Reflected in conversation. This is also super exciting to me that this, we've got people saying this is like the second thing, because really like talking about it helps us do the thing. And then I'm not surprised to see reflected in culture as our third rank, because that takes a lot of time and persistence. So really excited to see that policies is up there as number one. I think that's a really important step forward for every organization to be able to shift the culture. Awesome. Thanks everybody who participated in that. I am going to go ahead and invite our co-facilitators to introduce themselves. First, I'll just say I'm Aria Camioni Lind. You all know me, I think, because I'm with you every other month pretty much. I'm the CEO and principal of ARIA Strategies. My background is in history museum studies, and I've been leading my own consulting practice for the past 10 years, and we work all across the not-for-profit sector. So happy to be here, and I am going to pass it to Jordan Jace to introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Jordan Jace. I'm the education coordinator for the New York State Archives and the Archives Partnership Trust. I'm also the statewide coordinator for the Consider the Source New York program, a website, and also the Student Research Award program for New York State.
Hi, I'm Lavada Nahan. I'm the interpreter of African American history for New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, Bureau of Historic Sites.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be in this space with both of you. We are going to go ahead, and Lavada is going to take us through an overview of enslavement in New York. I'm going to pull up her slides, and she's going to tell us as much as she can within the time constraints we have today. And after Lavada is done with her comments, we're going to take questions for a little while because she can't stay with us for the whole time. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Also, you'll be able to come off mute and ask your questions if you'd like after Lavada gives her talk. So Lavada, I'm going to go ahead and get your slides set up. And thank you again for being with us.
It is my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me. As we go through this, I just want to encourage everyone to really just relax about it. It's a huge subject. It's a touchy subject these days, and it is a history that many of us, particularly in New York, are not familiar with New York's story. But as my opening slide says, yes, there was slavery in New York, and it was common. And I have common in all caps for a reason. So just know that it is there, and as we go through, we'll be able to embrace that a bit more. Next slide, please. What most of us learned in school, and even what is being taught in our schools today, is that there are 13 colonies, north and south, and that the enslaved arrived here in 1619, that the southern colonies had slaves, and northern colony, especially in New York, were safe havens and a place of abolition, that those enslaved lived on plantations and cabins behind the big house, that they picked cotton or sugar and also worked as house slaves. And if New York and slavery were mentioned at all, there were very few people here. It was a kinder slavery than you found in the South, and that it did not last long. And that New York was part of the Underground Railroad system, making it a safe place for freedom seekers to run through or to live in. And this is the baseline knowledge that most people, even today in New York, are very secure in knowing. Next, please. But in fact, what we know is not really completely true. When we speak of the 13 colonies, there are actually 3 sections. There is the North, which are British based. There are the middle colonies here in that golden color, which are Dutch based. And then we have the southern colonies in green, again, which are British based. What throws people off is the fact that we are Dutch founded. We are not British founded. And without learning that Dutch period, we miss the purchase of the first 11 men enslaved in New York and the rapid importation of Africans. We miss the establishment of Africans and their descendants as the primary labor force for the colony. We miss the establishment of laws and codes for a level of society that did not exist in the Netherlands or in most parts of Northern Europe. We miss the codification based on a single racial group. And we also miss those very important economic links to the overall institution of slavery. Next, please. But the history around the Dutch period, that research is less than 40 years old. So it is really common that people just are not aware of it. But in New York, enslavers are not just the elite class. There's the merchant class, the middling class, tenant farmers, Native Americans, and even freed Africans. The first 11 African and African descendant men enslaved in New Netherlands were purchased in 1626, not 1619. That is the arrival of people into Virginia. And they were purchased by the Dutch West India Company, not in New Amsterdam, but in fact up here around Albany and Fort Orange. We know their names, and we know that their names reflect a long presence of Portuguese and Dutch in the Kingdom of Congo and the area of Angola. Current research by Dr. Jaap Jacob says that that year actually may be 1627. Slavery is the law of the land in the whole process, and it lasted for 200 years, from 1626 to 1827. And at no point in this 200-year period could you just tell your enslaved person to go. You can't free them that way. There are two pieces of legislation that end the law of slavery. One is I have here the Gradual Manumission Act. Is actually the act for the gradual manumission, the gradual abolition of enslavement, and that's in 1799. And then there was the Gradual Emancipation Law in 1817. It brought the legal end of slavery to a close. However, it did not free all of those held in bondage. That legislation was actually designed to reclassify children who were born free as indentured servants, and they would be bound to their mother's enslaver until 1848. It was a conscious choice. Enslavers wanted a return on their investment, but they also had to craft a way for that dominant labor force not to leave people in the lurch. New York held more people in chattel slavery than any northern colony. And at one point, New York City had the second largest slave market in the 13 colonies, the second largest population in the 13 colonies, next to Charleston, South Carolina. Next, please. When we talk about enslavement, it is easy to think just only of the people, but we can't do that because in doing so, we miss those very important economic links. So when you think of the institution of slavery, we have to look at all areas in multiple places and in the multiple ways that slavery shows up in the economy and in society. In New Netherlands and New York, there are several major areas that we have to consider. When New Netherlands started as a colony, our cash crop was furs. But by the time the Dutch stepped into the fur trade, it was actually nearing its end. So very quickly, we had to come up with another cash crop, and that cash crop was wheat. So the enslaved Africans and the people of African descent, that physical populace, they are the labor force, but they are not only just in the farms, they're in the houses, they're in the mills, they're on the rivers, they are literally everywhere. We also have to look at the merchant traders, the slave traders, and the enslavers. The portion of the population who financially benefited directly from the transatlantic slave trade through trading. The Dutch primarily are international traders. Unlike the British south of New York in those southern colonies, who they look to land as increasing their wealth, the Dutch are looking to what products can they put on the international market. So they operate as slave traders, they operate as the ship owners, they invest in those ships, they are moving goods that are produced by enslaved labor in other parts of the world. And all of that wealth that they have is flowing into New York. We have those who bequeath, right? In a will, you bequeath things, so you leave things. And those things include the enslaved, or you gifted people, or you purchased for others, or traded within the colony. And that purchase for others is very important because that came up recently and really surprised people when we looked at Alexander Hamilton, who had been portrayed as someone who was not an enslaver. In fact, he both enslaved, but he was also a slave trader. His account books show countless times that he purchased enslaved for other people. Those who created a path to more enslavers and generational servitude. The commodities of the merchant traders, the goods that were used. New York will export thousands of tons of wheat out of New York down to the Caribbean and West Indies to feed those enslaved on the sugar plantations there. Then they will take sugar, bring it back to New York, take it to Europe. They will have mahogany, both in raw wood, but also houses full of mahogany furniture, a wood that is based on slave labor. Chocolate is harvested by enslaved, and more products that end up as part of our economy. The agricultural system that we use here too often throws people off because we don't see the common use of the word plantation. In fact, our farms are called patroons, manors, patents, or farms. Okay, and that structure is very important because that structure means that one family or one particular person will own thousands of acres of land. And we see that that owner may only have anywhere from 10 to 15 enslaved people, but of their thousands of acres, most of that land will be broken into small farms and leased to Northern European tenants, and those tenants will become enslavers. So on, say, a 50,000 acre manor, you may have anywhere from 20 to 50 different enslavers on that property. Next slide, please. So who were the Africans? We know that throughout the whole time of the transatlantic slave trade, people from Angola will dominate that body count. We know the Kingdom of Congo. We have a lot of Congolese here. We have a lot of Angolans here. We will have West Africans here, but they come very late in our period of enslavement. Something else that a lot of people assume is that we're bringing in a lot of quote unquote seasoned slaves from the Caribbean and the West Indies. In fact, that lasts only a very short period of time. We are, the enslavers here and the traders are importing directly from Africa. And we have that African cultural those Africanisms showing up in archaeological sites all across the state. We know they're coming from the Kingdom of Congo, which was heavy for Dutch trade. We know, again, that they are coming from the trade out of the areas of West Africa, particularly areas now called Nigeria or Yoruba land. Next slide, please. So Where is that cotton? As I said, our plantations, we may call them provisioning plantations, but when the Dutch colony, remember, we're set up by a company. We're not set up by the crown. We're set up by a group of businessmen who want to make a profit. They did not want to lose any of that profit when those initial fur traders were saying, hey, we need our own community here, and we need more people here. So they took a straight up medieval system called patroons and manors and moved that here. So one person will own a lot of land. Here around Albany, we have Rensselaerwyck, and that was settled by Kilian van Rensselaer. He was a jeweler, a diamond merchant on the board of trade for the Dutch West India Company. And that one manor was nearly 1 million acres in land. A plantation, official definition, is worked as one singular farm with a resident labor force. For 1 million acres, they're not working that as one farm. They're breaking those up into smaller farms. They are leasing that land to tenants, and those tenants are charged with growing wheat, not cotton. And wheat will remain the dominant cash crop of New York until we are far into the 19th century. And the enslaved, again, are everywhere. They're not just on the fields. They are the cooks, the ladies' maid, the valets, the butlers. They are the labor force. We do have indentured servants in New York, but by the time we get to the middle 18th century, many people from Europe who would want to come here as indentured servants actually bypass New York, because the labor force is so heavily in the enslaved. It's easier for them to find work somewhere else. Next, please. What we know, the difference between the northern and middle colonies and the southern colonies here, documents tell us that the enslaved are multilingual. They live throughout the colony and in all classes. There are no restrictions on their literacy, and they can do any type of work. And this is very important. That's why we have contemporaries like Sojourner Truth, who is born Isabella Bumfree and is illiterate her whole life. But we also have Jupiter Hammond, enslaved at Lloyd Manor out on Long Island, who is the first published Black poet. He is the teacher of his enslavers' children. He works as the secretary to his enslavers, right? And laws that are in place tended to restrict their movement, their behavior, especially towards whites. And most of those punishments, again, coming right out of the medieval period, where we have people broken on wheels, we have people burned at the stake, we have arranged, every town at one point has to have a whipping post and someone to, in fact, do that whipping. So we are not a kinder, gentler place. Next, please. Looking at runaway ads, this is a great book written by Susan Stetson-Cohen and Ashley Herbert Bijani. I always mispronounce her name, my apologies. In Defiance, and it is runaway ads. And this just shows you just the range of skill sets that are coming from these runaway ads. We have bakers and blacksmiths and brewers and brushmakers, butchers, we have carpenters, chimney sweeps, cooks, dancers, drivers, farmers, horse and oxen caretakers, house servants, knitters, laborers, masons, millers, musicians, preachers, privateers, readers and writers, sailors, scythe makers, shoemakers, cordwainers, soldiers, tanners, waiters, weavers, and so many more. occupations. They literally are woven into every aspect of the society of New York. Next, please. So how do you free an enslaved person, right? So there are a number of words that always come up. It's like manumission or to manumit. That means that you free an enslaved person who you own, who is slavery, while slavery is still the law of the land, right? You personally say, okay, you're done. That enslaved person just can't suddenly be free. They have to be physically inspected by the overseers of the poor. They have to be deemed fit. The overseers of the poor are a charitable organization countywide that is established very early in the period of Dutch New Netherland. They take care of the orphans and the widows and the indigent people. They have to, the enslaved, to be deemed fit, meaning that they are still profitable and that they are self-supporting, that they will not become a burden on the community's resources. But what happens when someone is deemed unfit? This means they cannot be freed, sold, or traded, and their owner has to take care of them for the rest of their lives. And in many cases, when people look at historic documents, they will say, oh, well, our owners, they took care of these elderly people. How nice of them to do that, right? But they did not do that out of charity. That is law. At one point, actually comes on and off the books, for every person that an owner wanted to free, a 200-pound sterling bond had to be put aside for that enslaved person. Also on and off the books is at some points they had to pay that freed person 20 pounds a year. These laws are meant so that there is not a free Black community. There are so many enslaved here, so many Africans and African descendants here. They actually don't want a free population. And these things like the bonds keep that from happening. To emancipate someone means that you free someone else's slaves, right? And that's what abolition is also. Abolition is the law of slavery. So when we grew up with the Emancipation Proclamation, that means that the law, the national law, freed everyone who was enslaved. And here we have those two pieces of legislation. Slavery by law ends on July 4th, 1827, but the Black citizenry did not celebrate on July 4th. They, in fact, celebrated on July 5th of 1827. But there are some clauses within the two pieces of legislation. And one of those allowed owners, after 1799, they had to start registering the births of all of the babies to enslaved women so they could, count the years, because their freedom was based on their age, 28 for men, 25 for women. But at the time of that registration, an owner could abandon that child to the overseers of the poor. The overseers of the poor then took that child, reclassified it as an indentured servant, in many cases returned it to the enslaver, and then paid them to take care of that child. And they would be bound to their mother's enslaver until they were 21. This law was crafted in such a way that the last person by law that would not be freed would be until 1848. However, the last person was actually freed in 1841. This is an image of him, and his name was Caesar. So it is a very convoluted process for someone to become free. And while this process is going on, we also have the two Fugitive Slave Acts that come into play, which means that many people who had been enslaved just freed were also kidnapped and re-enslaved in the South. Next, please. So in truth, 1624, the founding of the Dutch West India Company in New Netherlands. We are celebrating next year the 400th anniversary of the founding of our colony. 2 years later, the first 11 men of African descent will be purchased. They are not coming off a slave ship. They are, in fact, coming off a Dutch privateer who had attacked a Portuguese ship. They were taken from there. They said they were sailors because they were Black. They were sold and purchased as slaves here in New York or New Netherlands, and that will be in 1626. We will be celebrating the 400th anniversary of that purchase. New York held more enslaved than any northern colony. New York had the largest population of women as enslavers. We have a very large population of women as enslavers. And more often than not, they lived within the houses of their enslavers in the attics and in the basements. They did not live in separate units. And that slavery was not kinder, gentler, or any variation of that theme here. Okay. Next, please. So when we see and are looking for enslavement, what kind of documents are we looking for? Numbers. Numbers are very important. Many people are always looking for names, but we will find more numbers of enslaved than we will find names. We're looking for births, deaths, their cells of them, the jobs they did, their behaviors. How do they show up in letters and in when other people are writing about them? We're looking for things. How was the international slave trade supported? In your account books, look for the purchases of sugar in your collections. Where is that mahogany furniture, the spices, land ownership? We have a lot of people in New York who have plantations throughout the Caribbean, in the West Indies, or they're trading with the Caribbean and the West Indies. We're looking for people who are investing in those merchant ships. Look at the wills. Are they freeing people? Are they bequeathing? Are they gifting or selling people? Look in the inventories. It is in the inventories that we actually will often find names and ages. Vendue notices, right? Those estate sales. Look at runaway ads. And look back generations. Recently, we've had to start following the widows. If someone shows up in a census as a widow with only 1 or 2 slaves, look back to her husband's will. Did he give away other people that now may be lost because we're only looking at census records? Next, please. Thank you.
Lavada, thank you so much for that. I think most folks who are here know, and I hope folks who watch this after the fact know that this year we're spending our program time on really grappling and understanding experiences and perspectives of Indigenous communities in New York State, and also really understanding and grappling with enslavement in New York State. And so I really felt like this was an important piece for us all to be on the same page. So just thank you again so much for this. And before we say goodbye to you, I just want to open it up to any of our attendees, our participants, if you have any questions for Lavada. So we'll give it a beat to see if we have any come in, and I'll ask Leah if any have come in to just lift those up, if any came in over chat.
And while we're taking this minute, I just want to say, I know that across the country, there is a desire to remove the names of the enslavers, right? To get rid of them on street signs and on schools and things like that. And that is a challenge for us right now in New York, because we are still so new into the research of enslavement and finding the enslaved. And we do that through the names of their owners. So as we choose to remove those names, I think that it is important that we take a breath, slow down a minute, and make sure that we have done all the research necessary to locate those that they owned or held before we remove that name. Because once those names go from public view, it is very difficult for those of us who are doing this research to actually find the people. If you go to New York's public library and you're trying to find books on enslaved in New York, you won't find them. But if you go to the local history section and ask the librarian via individual family names, you will find them. So I do caution everyone as we walk through or you participate in these conversations, just to note how important it is for us to have access to this information. And we do that through the European names.
Great, thanks. Let's see. I am not seeing any questions come in now, but if folks have anything that occurs to them, throughout this presentation or certainly after the fact, there's going to be contact information at the end of our time together today. So I encourage you to reach out, ask your questions, get them answered. And in the meantime, Lavada, thank you so much for bringing this knowledge to us today so that we can all kind of start from the same place. Thanks
Great.
again.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, because really the reason that we wanted to have Lavada here is to give us that background, but that's because we wanted everybody to start from the same place as we talk with Jordan about consider the source. So I'm not going to say too much. I'm just going to say I'm so excited that Jordan's with us. We're going to talk about consider the source. Same thing. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Jordan and I have set aside some time at the end of our time together to answer any questions that you'd like to lift up. And I think at this point, Jordan, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to you, so you can kind of give us the overview of what is consider the source.
Okay, thank you. All right, you can see that okay? Okay, thank you. Consider the source, and some of you may already be familiar, but I'm going to show it today through a lens of the anti-racism and equity, since that's been so much of what we've been doing in the past 2 years. We got a grant from IMLS to specifically go and seek out documents related to marginalized groups and some of the lesser known histories, and towards an eye of making the website as a whole more equitable and accessible, so that anybody who comes on here can see their own history and not just, what we have here at the State Archives, which is, I should say, the records of state government. So what we have is very specific to the perspective of state government here at the archives. And so I'm going to show you a little bit around the website. It's designed specifically for K-12 educators and students, but it's open to the public. Anybody can use it. Anybody can register for an account. It's free. It always will be free. And right now we have, if you scroll down here, you'll see we have over 3,000 documents on here now, over 2,000 teacher-created learning activities, and currently we have 1,300 registered members. You don't have to be a registered user in order to access the documents, but if you're a teacher and you want to save the learning activities and use them in your classroom, you have to register for an account. If you do that, you do get 1 year free subscription. Not subscription, 1 year free access to New York Archives magazine digitally through the website. So that's one of the things we offer to try to encourage people to register for an account. So the Browse Historical Records is where you just access those 3,000 plus primary sources, and we're always adding more. So repositories, anyone in the state repository can submit documents for consideration to be added to consider the source. We make sure that they're relevant to what teachers and students are looking for. And I'll talk about this a little bit more when Ari and I have our discussion. But we also make sure that we are balancing the value of putting a document up to the harm that it may cause you know, depending on the language and the history that it speaks to. So that's one of the things we'll discuss a little bit later. When you browse, it lands you onto a browse by topic page. And as you see here, we've started to expand our topics, but we have African American, civil rights. We've got the Dutch here. We've got a slavery topic to browse by. We have Indigenous Peoples of North America. Kind of debated that what to call that, but we wanted to make sure it was inclusive of all Indigenous peoples. So we have documents not just related to New York's Indigenous communities, but other ones as well. So we wanted to make sure we were as inclusive as possible with that title, that subject heading. We also have urban renewal, which, as most of you probably know, has very much impacted African American communities throughout the country and their living situation. So that's in one of the new topics that we've added. So if you click on a topic, and since we're talking about enslavement, click on slavery. We have 117 documents here. And Lovato was mentioning, which I'm glad she went first, because you got a good overview of some of the terminology and some of the types of documents that are available related to enslavement in New York. And as the state archives, we do have the laws. So we have made those readily available here for teachers and students. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, well, they look wonderful, but teachers and students in particular don't really read cursive. And so what we've done is we've created transcriptions for the documents that are in cursive, which increases accessibility because that's a huge barrier for teachers to use primary sources in the classroom. And so by having the transcription readily available, just the teachers can feel free to use them with their students. And this one is excerpted, so it's because it's a very long document. But what it does speak to is what Lovato was saying is that, you know, that myth that slavery in New York was kinder and gentler and not like it was in the South. And this document shows that it very much was very similar to, it was, you know, a regulated part of New York society. And, you know, there's parts of this law that requires each town to have a town whipper that they've hired, you know, that is ready for punishment or for things that violation of the law, which again restricts how many enslaved individuals can gather in one place at one time, what times they're allowed to be out, their access to alcohol, their ability to purchase things. So it's very much a regulatory system of what they can and cannot do, with listed punishments or consequences for violation of the law. So I think it's a very important, and it does have some, you know, heavy language in it, but it is an important document for making sure that history is readily available and accessible, and that the correct history is being taught and not this other version of what slavery was like in New York. And I'm always surprised there's a lot of teachers who didn't know that there was like actual slavery in New York, and then they don't know that it existed as late as it did. So like, oh yeah, but that was, you know, British colonial, and you know, they don't even think about the Dutch period. So making these documents available allows them to be able to access that history. And so we have quite a few documents. We also have that Act for Gradual Abolition that Lovato was speaking about as well. Yeah, that's in here somewhere. Oh, right here it is. So again, very nice looking document, but you need the transcription in order for teachers to be able to use it. So that increases the accessibility. And we always have a description, so metadata that goes with the document so that the teacher and students are aware of where the document came from. And so consider the source is not a repository, it's just an online portal to give you access to these documents. So make sure it's important that they know where the documents are housed, where they came from. Here's that 1817 law that Lovato mentioned as well. So what teachers are able to do with this is if they find a document that they want to use in their classroom. So here's a manumission record. So an individual being manumitted, and this is from the Albany Hall of Records. So they've contributed this one. So a teacher can just click here and they can create, we have different types of learning activities they can create, and they can create a learning activity to go with that document. And this allows them, I'll just show you real quick here, and I never type a real name of a activity, because once one name is taken, even if it's deleted, it's never allowed to be taken again. So I always try not to take up any good names of learning activities that a teacher might want to use. But they select the thinking skill. So this would be historical analysis, interpretation. So this is what the teacher would do with the documents here on the website. You know, I wasn't looking at the date on that one. I think it might be colonial. Actually, it might be, we'll put colonial America. But we've got all the different historical eras here. Type of document. So if they're going to use it for a high school, maybe they'll use it for middle school. You click on the level that they're going to make it for. This is New York State, and it's specifically Capital District. You know, and then they would select the topics so that other teachers can find it. So that's the nice thing here, is teachers can create something and just keep it for themselves, or they can make it public so that other teachers can find it too. So it's a great collaborative tool for teachers to share how they're using these documents in the classroom. Here's the document here. They can also upload their own. So say they have another document on enslavement that they want to use, pair with this one. It just has to be a JPEG. They can upload their own document as well. Here's where they write instructions for their students and for other teachers to use the learning activity. We pre-populate those basic sourcing questions, but if they don't want to use them, they can just delete them. They can change them. They can add new ones. If they have multiple documents they're using, they want to duplicate the question. We make it easy for them to ask the same question about multiple documents. And then the last page is just publish and share. So they have to publish it to use it with their students. But if they want other teachers to be able to find it, they would hit the public button here. And they can also share it with their students directly through Google Classroom, or by sharing the link through email or whatever platform they use. So we've designed it really to try to make it as easy as possible for educators to use primary sources, since time is a huge barrier for them, and accessibility is a huge barrier. This website was designed specifically to make that easier. And then they can also browse learning activities in the same way, but also by grade level, activity type, thinking skills. And these are all created by teachers that we've paid. We've paid them through grant programs that we've had. So all of the documents we got through this diversity program, we were able to make available to teachers, and we were able to pay them to write learning activities to go along with them. So we've got a lot of learning activities already made using those documents. So again, we've got, it really is specific for K-12 educators, but it opens accessibility, I think, for even the general public. It's a curated set of documents, so it's not everything you would find on a place like New York Heritage or maybe at individual repositories, but carefully curated for teachers and students to use and access. And again, we've been adding as much as we can within the last couple of years now towards the equity, diversity, and inclusion piece as well. So I think that's a basic overview of what Consider a Source is, what it does. And I want to just put out there, I'll probably say it again a few more times, but we are always accepting more documents from local repositories because they have a lot of perspectives that we don't have here in the state archives. And so it's important for teachers and students to have access to multiple perspectives when they're looking at primary sources.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. So a couple things. I'm going to pull up a couple slides and talk through some stuff before Jordan and I have our conversation, but I just wanted to name that Jordan's from the New York State Archives. There's a huge difference in resources between the New York State Archives and the folks who are here today in your organizations. And so Jordan and I know that. And what we really wanted to talk about was process, because collections accessibility is something that we're all striving for. And the folks who have the resources to do it have come up with a pretty standard process that's kind of what we want to share today, and that's what our conversation is going to be based on. And also this just occurred to me while Jordan was talking, but this partnership between educators and museums, historical societies, libraries, archives is a really important one in New York State. You know, the legislature has, you know, revises the legislation, and it's a big advocacy topic for all of us. And we're constantly trying to figure out how do we like use the stuff, you know, the material culture and the documentation of New York history with the kids who are learning this and who are growing up here and are going to be our workers and volunteers and patrons in the coming years. And so I just feel like this is a really interesting like thought experiment of like how can our organizations make those links? How do we link up educators with what we have in our collections? And so I'm always really interested in how that that form of collections accessibility shows up. So just wanted to say a couple things myself about consider the source. Jordan is the expert on this, but I have opinions. So there's so many digitized resources doing the work of anti-racism for the New York State Library and Archives. So I just want to say that like the New York State Library and Archives has really worked hard to start to discern what they need to share and how they need to share it in order to really bring this anti-racism lens. So I picked out some of my favorite examples that I'm just going to throw up here on the screen. Well, this is the homepage. Jordan showed us this. But this Act for Gradual Abolition of Slavery, I am a huge fan of getting the primary source documentation in front of our constituents so they can actually see like what happened and how bleak was it. Showing that we weren't a monolith in New York State, this Down with Abolition broadside, people who are anti-abolitionists, also like the amazing photographs that we have in New York State. This is Lyman Epps Sr., who lived in what became Timbuktu in the North Country, which is a region in New York State that has reached out to us a lot during these programs and some other work that we've done with folks up there to say like it's hard for us to figure out how to talk about this because the North Country isn't known for its diversity, and all of our communities are diverse, and this helps us really be able to put like faces and names to that diversity that has been a part of what is now New York for hundreds of years. And then my last one was that I wanted to share was a meeting of runaway slaves at Cazenovia in 1850. I grew up in central New York, and I was excited to see this on Consider the Source. Just to see, you know, like Jordan and I are going to talk about this a little bit, but like see folks who have agency, you know, that people aren't acted upon, people are actors, and they make decisions about their lives, and really understanding and celebrating that feels important to me, and feels like this is a great resource for helping our constituents and our patrons really understand what the full story was. So anyway, those were my favorites. The process that Jordan and I talked about when we were planning this is making the decision to do this, coming up with some guidelines and guardrails, talking about which stakeholders needed to be included in conversations, talking about how to fund this work, and then accountability and ongoing work. And so Jordan and I are going to structure our conversation with each other for the rest of our time around this process. And I'm going to ask him about these things, and he's going to share with us how this worked for the Archives Partnership Trust and Consider the Source, because we think this is a process that you can take and use at your own capacity with your organization to begin building out collections accessibility through an anti-racism lens. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen just in case Jordan wants to share his screen. But Jordan, I think first what I'd love is, can you tell us about some of the do you have any like favorite materials, first of all? Because right, we always start with our like collection when we're
Yes.
making any decisions. So do you have any favorites from Consider the Source?
Oh, sure. Do you want specifically related to enslavement or just in general?
I mean, I think if you could do specifically related to
Okay.
enslavement, that would be awesome.
Okay. All right. So yes, there are many, I have to say. So one of the things that I think is showing the documents that you find the voices where you don't think you're going to find them, right? So like the wills, Lovato mentioned wills, and seeing, and women owning, being enslavers. So we have a will that was found at, I think it's the Fenimore, the library there, at the Fenimore Museum, and it's of Rachel Bogardus, and it's 1781, and she is bequeathing enslaved individuals not just to her children but to her grandchildren as well. And so it's and it's you can try to imagine what it's like to be an individual who's enslaved and you're being bequeathed to one family member and your child or your sister or friend or whoever is being bequeathed to another. And this one, they're all being divided up to various um, family members, and so it gives some sense of this happened on a regular basis, and it is a woman who's bequeathing them, not the man. So, and I think interesting, I hadn't thought about it, but Lavada had mentioned looking back at what her husband's will might have been, because they may have had many other enslaved individuals there in the household at one point, and when he died they would have been either sold off or bequeathed to others. So I hadn't thought about going back and looking to see what that situation was in the household. But this is one of my favorites just because it's one that I wouldn't have thought of initially as being a good document, but teachers like it because it gives students an idea of what New York wasn't much different than the South in this way. And so I think that's one of my favorites for that reason. And then, well, the Sojourner Truth document that we have is, oh, you know what, and I think I'm on the learning activities. So let me just go back to documents here. And actually, I'm just going to use the search box to make it a little quicker. So the archives within the last few years received a very large set of court documents. They were being housed actually down in New York City, but related to New York court systems pre-1848. And this one was discovered by our head of researchers, Jim Foltz, who's a phenomenal, he knows everything about the New York State court system and how to find the documents. So if you're looking for that, ask for Jim. But he found this document, and because her name, wasn't Sojourner Truth at the time, it was Isabella Van Wagenen, which was after a family that she had lived with in the area. She submits a writ of habeas corpus to get her son back. So this is 1828. So, when teachers always say to students, what's the date of the document, to place it in context. So most people don't know that there were still enslaved individuals in New York in 1828. And the fact that her son had been sold south after, enslavement had legally ended, like there were still enslaved individuals in New York, but here's some advocacy, right? Some agency. She has gone and found a lawyer who is submitting this document on her behalf. And you can see here on page 4, she signs with an X. She couldn't read or write, but she's able to use the legal system, and she does get her son back. I think he's 8 or 9 at the time. And he becomes a worker on the canal down in the D&H Canal area. But so having documents not just that show the state of what an enslaved person's life was like in New York, and the harshness of it, but also documents that show that they did have some agency and that there were ways. She was the first woman of color to sue and win in New York State court. So it's a very significant document for that reason. But again, it's a primary source. And a lot of teachers will tell you if there's controversy in their districts about teaching this history, they go to the primary source and they use the primary sources because you can't argue with the primary sources. It's not like they selected a textbook that has a particular perspective. They're using the raw materials of history to have their students uncover what that history was. And so there's a lot of power in using primary sources in the classroom rather than a textbook or a lecture. So this is another one of my favorite documents.
Awesome. So as you're talking, I'm thinking about like how did this come to be? Like, right? How did these decisions get made? And this keeps coming up for me. Like, how did you decide your primary audience for this accessible collection? So sort of all of those things, like how did these decisions get made? Like, what was the sort of impetus for deciding that we needed an online digital collection, that we were going to focus on a certain audience, and then deciding what to include? Can you talk a little bit about those things?
Sure. So as the educator, I'm tasked with developing resources and materials for teachers. So I can't claim the title, consider the source. So I don't know how many of you might have known Julie Daniels when she was here, but she was the outreach person for our state archives. And in the 90s, a book was written called Consider the Source, Teaching with Historical Records. And it was sent out to every school in the state of New York for teachers to learn how to use primary sources. And then it had a few primary sources in the back and some suggestions for learning activities on how you can incorporate these into your curriculum. So always thinking about aligning what we produce for teachers with the state requirements, right? So the social studies framework, the learning standards, the document that the state put out for culturally responsive education. So thinking about how we make those readily available. So I do workshop after workshop with teachers. I've been doing this work for about 13 years now. And I was an educator. So I know the time constraints. I know the accessibility issues. I know the struggles with cursive. So I was thinking, how do we create something that makes it so easy? So reduces some of the friction, right? The challenges and barriers for teachers to do this work. What do we create that makes it that's not the excuse anymore, right? So if a teacher really wants to do this, they don't have time, they don't really have a knowledge base in all of this, because this is a lot of things to know about. What do we create? And so we did some surveys with teachers. I was always talking with educators about what we could do to make it easier for them. And we're always tweaking the website. So we're always getting feedback from educators on what we have available, how the tools work, always making some tweaks that way. But so we raised money to build a website. So we thought, well, having a place where you don't have to browse through, tens of thousands of records, right? So even our digital collections at this point are quite large here at the archives. And same with New York Heritage, Library of Congress. I mean, they have great resources, but I can never find the same thing twice on there. I struggle. So what can we do to curate that down to a place where everything the teacher finds on here aligns with the curriculum and what they are supposed to be teaching, but also in a way that adds multiple perspectives. So teachers are always looking for ways that students can see themselves in the lessons in the curriculum. So initially we built the website and we added all the things that had been developed up to that point, but towards an eye of making sure that we were conscious of the wording. So even the archives is still currently going through a lot of their descriptions and making the language more inclusive. And we now have a harmful language statement on the website, to let people know that they could encounter some documents with harmful language. But as we developed Consider the Source, we got a web developer, and we started to think about what would teachers want and what would make this the easiest for them. And we use DocsTeach. We talked to the people at the National Archives about their online resource for educators to kind of what works with that, what doesn't work, what would they change. And that helped to inform what we created. But with the diversity and collaborative knowledge program, which we got an IMLS grant to do that work, that came from a place of looking at what we had and saying, this is not representative of the people of New York State, throughout the history from the Dutch colonial, well, pre-Dutch, right, from the indigenous all the way through, for indigenous, we have a lot of deeds, land records. We have a few letters that came from different indigenous communities petitioning the government of the colonial governments or the state government, but not a lot, right? So where do you go to find more inclusive perspectives, things that really speak to individual experiences and what these communities experience throughout the history? Because it's not just New York history, it's everyone's history. So how do you find those documents? And so that's where that grant project came from. And so we spent 2 years building relationships with repositories throughout the state. The library councils were a huge help in doing that work. They've got lots of members who were eager to make their things available to teachers. And we acted as a guide. So we wanted to make sure that what we made available was relevant to what teachers were looking for, but also respective of the communities that they were representing. So making sure we had balance of perspective, and always being aware of our biases. Like, we all have biases, right? Like if you say you don't, you everybody does, because you come to the world with a certain perspective, you have certain experiences. So being aware of what that is for yourself does a lot towards making wise decisions when thinking about this work. And also speaking with members of the communities that are represented in these documents. And that's what we did. So that was the catalyst for Consider the Source, and then for that broader expansion of resources on there related to diverse communities.
Thanks for that. You've sort of touched on a couple other things I want to talk about, so I want to go to those. When you were talking about balance of perspectives and being aware of biases, I was thinking about the next thing I want to talk about, which is, what were the guidelines and guardrails that you developed? Like, how did you create the container for this, right? So like this webinar, we have our learning container that we made with our norms and agreements, right? And we have to do that for projects, and we have to do that, especially when you're talking about government archives and libraries and all these resources, materials, objects, like just all the things. You have to narrow it down, and we do that by creating the criteria for the work. And so, what was that criteria? What were those guidelines, and how did you develop those?
A big part of it was, what is the story that you want to tell with those documents? So not just randomly selecting documents or picking all the documents, right? Like, you don't, that's too much, especially for educators. Like, you don't want them weeding through all of these things that aren't relevant or maybe aren't appropriate for the classroom. So we started with, what's the story that you want to tell with your documents? So repositories would be like, well, we have some on African-American history, and we have some on Indigenous, and we have some on women's history, and some on. So I would say, what's the story you want to tell? So one of the things that we ended up getting was Delaware County Historical Society has documents related to the milk strikes. So, which not many people know about that history. But the people who were doing the milk strikes were recent immigrants who were not part of the larger milk conglomerates that had kind of formed partnerships during the Great Depression to keep the price of milk at a certain level. And so that's what the milk strikes were. And so they have all these photographs, great photographs and documents related to that history. And that's a story to tell, right? So thinking about what you have in your collection and what the story is you want to tell is that first, I think, the first step. And then looking at each individual document and, evaluating it for, will it be harmful to some people to view this document? Why might it be harmful? And is the value of telling the history, so important that you do make it available, but you say, you give that notice that there may be harmful language in this document. We never change the language within a document, so it's very important that we make the full document available. but letting people know that there may be harmful language in there. So that's you know, and I have a line, right? Like I have things that I would say we're not going to put that up there. One, I don't think it has a lot of value for educators, and the amount of harm it can, like if someone grabs an image off of Consider the Source and uses it in an inappropriate way, you know, I don't have a lot of control over that. And I want to make sure I'm not putting something up there that's what people see. The first thing they see a document, it's like, oh, you know, I could make a big deal out of this using it this way. So I'm cautious of, of those types of things that I don't know that they have a whole lot of value in teaching the history. There's other things you can use to teach that history that aren't as harmful. So those are some of the guidance. And again, just being aware. So just because I might not see something as harmful doesn't mean that someone else might not view it that way. So I don't want to restrict the history. I don't want to tell partial history, right? I want people to see the full history, but I want to be very conscious in the types of materials that we're making available to tell those stories.
Yeah, thanks for that. And so sort of the same thing, going back to when you were talking about how this all kind of came to be and how it was shaping up, you talked a lot about stakeholders, and you talked about identifying partnerships. You talked about the primary audiences is teachers, educators in New York. You talked about how you met with folks from the National Archive to talk about their, you know, digitized collections that were available, what works, what doesn't, what they would change. So can you tell us a little bit more about the stakeholders involved? And also you talked a little bit about the funding that you received for this, because those are two really big pieces of anytime our organizations make decisions, we're always looking at who are our stakeholders, how will this affect or influence them, and then how are we going to pay for this? You know, what's our resource profile for this? So
Right.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, you know, first we kind of looked at who our audience was going to be, right? So the educators and the students, and the types of things that they would be looking for. So we started a conversation with them initially, but then also the library councils when we applied for the grant. So the grant came from the Institute for Museum and Library Services, and they have a Laura Bush 21st Century Leadership Grant. That's what we received for this 2-year program. And so the library councils do a lot of this type of work. They help organizations with digitization projects, and they help them with getting grant money. So they were a great help because we divided the state into 9 regions. And then we identified within each region what those histories looked like, right? What types of stories and documents were we looking for? And then in addition to that, historians, so public historians, I've been to AFNI, I'm going next week, been to AFNI several years in a row, opening those lines of communication, because historians are always looking for ways to get their documents, their resources into the hands of teachers, and they don't have a lot of success just knocking on the door of the school. So Consider the Source is one of those things that we've now created to help bridge that gap. And part of that program was we did institutes across the state where we invited educators along with historians and representatives from local repositories to open the conversation so that they could learn about what teachers are looking for and what they're able to use in the classroom. And teachers could learn about what types of things the repositories have, the knowledge that the historians have, and also how those things are organized, because it's very different. You don't just do a subject search at a repository. Things are housed by collection, which so you can find something about African Americans in the baseball collection at the Schenectady Historical Society. So like there's teachers don't know all those things. They have most of them have an education in education, not history or research. So helping them figure out how you navigate the repository world, the archives world, was part of that. But then also just finding out what we could do as a statewide organization to help them better communicate and talk and get together. And one of the things that come out of that is Ulster County now this fall, their historians conference will be bringing in educators. So I'm helping to organize that. I'm going to speak there. But so it's more localized, right? How do we get our historians working with our local teachers? And so those were our major stakeholders. But then also thinking about the diversity piece, when we did these institutes, I reached out to speakers, keynote speakers for each of these institutes that represented the communities that we were seeking to make these resources available. So on Long Island, we had someone from the indigenous community there. And then also up north, someone from the CCAHA community spoke at the Northern New York one. So, you know, and then I had the owner of the Buffalo, there's an African-American Buffalo newspaper. She spoke at the Western New York one. So involving members of the community so that you're bringing in that perspective as a part of what you're doing, you know, the broader part of what you're doing. So as many places I could do that, I was conscious of doing that. And then we held teacher workshops where the teachers were able to see all the things we digitized and give us feedback. What's missing? You know, what would you need in addition in order to use these resources in your classroom? And then we had the teachers creating the lessons. So they are the stakeholders who are going to be using them. So we wanted to make sure they were involved in that process as well. So, you know, many moving parts, many stakeholders to take into consideration and listen to, and to help inform the work, which, you know, I think, and we can always do better, right? So I've learned a lot from the last 2 years going forward, which is fantastic because it's things I didn't know before, and now things that I know to do in the future. So always learning and not assuming that you know anything really is kind of how I approach this work.
That's awesome. I feel like that's every historian ever, where we're like, oh, I thought that was the thing last week, but I guess this new research came out. So I'm just going to go read that and then I'll know more, I guess, about the thing I thought I knew all the things about. So right at the end of that response, you started talking about sort of like, how do you like get better? How do you use the feedback that you're getting to like continuously improve, essentially? And so that made me wonder, how do you know you're on the right track? Like how have you all with Consider the Source like confirmed that you're going in the right direction and providing a resource that people need? And then also, what do you do when you get negative feedback or like you know you've made a mistake? Like how does that go? Knowing you're on the right track, and then like what if you're like, oh yeah, that was like a huge gaffe. Like how do you all handle that?
Right. So knowing I'm on the right track has a lot to do with feedback. So I'm always talking to members of the community. I mean, I talk to Lavada several times a year. Like, you know what I mean? So, you know, she's a great resource. She's, I mean, extremely knowledgeable and up on a lot of the current research. And like you said, things are always changing. What we know is, you know, I like it because a lot of people think of history as static. And it's not any more static than science, right? We're always discovering new things, new documents that inform us, that tell us that, well, maybe it didn't happen quite that way. I love that Yab Jacobs is like discovering that maybe it wasn't 1626, it might have been 1627. Like, so, and that's one of the things I do, right? So keeping informed of best practices and, you know, the newest things that are out there, which is a full-time job in and of itself. Anybody who does research knows that, like, there's always new things coming out. But, you know, I just read The Spaces of Enslavement by Mosterman, and that uses a lot of documents here at the archives that I haven't even seen, because, I mean, we have, you know, almost 300 million documents, so it doesn't, I don't know everything that's here, but a lot of documents around enslavement in New York that really would be great for Consider the Source. So I'm discovering new things all the time. And then when I get negative feedback, when I hear that something isn't, you know, someone tells me that, you know, maybe you shouldn't have done this way, or, you know, did you know this is the more current? I'm open to all those things because I want to be learning all the time. And so what I will do is I will take that information and I will investigate. I will reach out to the people that I have that are contacts in the different communities that have the knowledge base, make sure that is in fact the way it is, and then we change. So I'm always, I have full control over Consider the Source. Even the learning activities that teachers create, I'm able to go in So there is a level of acknowledging that you don't know everything, you never will know everything, and being open to learning from others. And then if it really is a big mistake and it was harmful, you apologize and you move on and you do better. You know, you always are trying to be aware and be as informed as possible. And we're human, we all make mistakes, and information is always changing. So that one thing you thought was the way and you find out something new, well, you know, you investigate and then you make those changes. And that's the responsible, I feel like the responsible thing to do. And with history, it is, those conversations need to happen, I think, more often, you know, around documents and just the historical narrative, and what's been written and what we've learned, you know, more recently. So that's how I handle it.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. So can you talk, this is sort of like the accountability, like ongoing work part of the process. So can you talk about like the goals of this accessible collection? Can you talk about the ongoing work with this? And can you talk a little bit about how equity and anti-racism fit into this? Like, how do you stay accountable to those things, considering the goals and the ongoing work?
Sure, sure. So I mean, like I said before, I mean, the very basic, we're trying to make accessible documents related to, you know, the history of not just New York, but the United States and global. We have lots of global items on Consider the Source as well, not just local documents, but making them accessible to our specific audience, which is K-12 educators and their students. But also, you know, I just think it's so important that when students are studying history, they're able to see themselves in the history. And for so long, I feel like, you know, especially even now, textbooks don't reflect a lot of the student's experience. So I think primary sources is how you do that. So a major goal of ours with Consider the Source is that students can find things on there related to themselves and their history. And so, you know, that drives a lot of what we do. Making sure everything we have on there is aligned with what teachers are supposed to be doing, what their work is, what they're looking for, you know, and then always adding more, you know, but not so much that it's overwhelming. So being careful about what we add so that it's still accessible and easy for teachers to navigate and find what they're looking for. And so with the equity and anti-racism piece, you know, it starts with the selection, right? So what are you choosing to put up there and what are you choosing not to put up there? And so that's the beginning of that conversation. And then the vocabulary. So what are you using to describe these documents? What is the current understanding of what is harmful and what is not harmful as far as language goes? So we try the best we can in our descriptions to use appropriate language in the descriptions. And if the title is the title of the document, right? And so it has harmful language, we try to use quotation marks for actual titles from the document so that people know that language is coming right from the document. That's not what we chose to put up there. And then again, like I said, knowing your bias. So knowing those areas where you tend, as an individual, tend to think one way, and you know that probably the less harmful or more appropriate way to do something is this way, always being aware of that. And again, you make mistakes and then, like I said, correct them, you apologize, you move on, you know, and doing everything with intentionality. So like I don't just throw things up on Consider the Source. I don't just, you know, quick write a description. I really am thoughtful, you know, and everyone, even my interns that I hire here, you know, it's one of the first things I address with them. We need to be thoughtful in how we put things up here, what we're putting up, and how we're presenting them, and being conscious of the story, right? So, and the perspectives. So I think for equity, it's about, is everyone equally represented in this resource? Can anybody of any background come on to this resource and find documents related to their history? And that's an ongoing process. We're not there yet. I don't know if we'll ever like be there, but it's part of the ongoing work. It's part of what we're always trying to do moving forward, is making sure we're have as much equity, that individuals can come on there and say, well, this is great, but there's nothing on here that represents my history. You know, you don't want someone to come to the site with that, and leave with that feeling. So again, that's pretty much how it's informing what we're doing, as far as the anti-racism, you know, and anti-racism is, you know, making sure that it's not about one group of people over another group of, it's everyone. It's an inclusive history.
Awesome, thanks. So my last question to you before we go into, questions and some conversation with our participants today. Do you have any like words of wisdom or advice for other organizations using a similar process, like, creating sort of what you talked about, guardrails and accountability, so that they can begin creating or continue creating accessible collections through anti-racist approaches?
Yeah, I would say know your audience. So who are you intending for what you're making accessible? Who is it intended for, right? So knowing who those individuals are, or communities, and then also what story are you trying to tell? I think it's important to think about what you're making accessible, what you're putting out there, and what it speaks to. And multiple perspectives. So, you know, we've got things on Consider the Source that, you know, we have things on school desegregation where it's people writing into the Commissioner of Education saying, you don't do this, don't desegregate our schools, you know, and threatening, you know, we're the white taxpayers of this state, you know, and so it has harmful language, which we're aware of, but it represents the perspective that a lot of individuals in these communities were facing at the time, which, you know, speaks to the history of it. So, but when we also have people writing in for support, right? So we've got lots of people supporting the commissioner and saying, please do this. You know, these are terrible conditions and that needs to be remedied, and you're the only one that can do it. So making sure you can, as to the best of your ability, right? And if your documents tend to skew one perspective or another, you can always provide links to other places that, you know, have different perspectives or suggestions on where to find other perspectives. But just being conscious of that, you know, and education, just always educating yourself about, you know, what's out there and what the appropriate way of making things accessible are. You know, and that I do a lot of that, you know, I do a lot of reading and a lot of, you know, investigating, and that informs my work.
Thanks. Thank you so much for having that conversation with me. I was just so delighted when we were first putting this together and you basically just told me this whole process and I was like, that's it. That's like the formula. Like we can share this with everybody and they can do their version of this process. So thanks. Hey, we want to hear from you. I saw we had a question come up in the chat. This is from Kathleen. I'll say, I'm going to read this one. If you put it in the chat, I'll happily read your question for Jordan. But you can also raise your hand, and you can speak if you want to speak in the webinar space. Kathleen's question is, what tool is used to verify the accuracy of the transcriptions of the written cursive documents? So this is like one of those like really like technical, okay, we're ready to put something out there. It's transcribed. How do we make sure it's accurate?
Right. So a lot of what we have isn't transcribed, and I'm very fortunate to have a recently retired archivist from here at the State Archives who was only retired 2 weeks and said, what do you got for me? And is very experienced in reading 17th, the 18th, you know, 19th century cursive. And so she does a lot of our transcriptions for us. I always take a look at them after she does them. So there's always a second set of eyes on the transcriptions that we do. We don't use a service. We don't put it through, you know, a tool. We're very reliant on individuals to help us with the transcription process. even if I transcribe something, I always give it to at least one or two other archivists to look over, to make sure I didn't, miss, to the best of our ability, right? But again, there too, we're always open for, constructive criticism. So if you find something that has been transcribed inaccurately, we also have people sometimes, they'll email us or let us know. And then we'll look back over it to see, where it is and if they are indeed correct, or, and then we make the correction. So to the best of our ability, with at least two sets of eyes on everything, we do the transcriptions.
So old-fashioned, like we're
Yes.
historians and
Yes.
archivists and librarians. We do it the old-fashioned way. Somebody who can read cursive reads it, transcribes it, and then somebody else who can read cursive
Yes.
looks at the primary source and then looks at the transcription.
Yes.
Got it.
If you find
Yeah.
something that actually works, that's, technological, tell me, but I have not found anything that's accurate enough
Yeah.
for my purposes to utilize. So it is a slow process. But again, you want it to be as accurate as possible.
So this brings up something for me that we work with clients a lot on building capacity in lots of different ways at ARIA Strategies. And one of the things we tell them is work to the capacity that you have. So if you don't have that capacity yet, like it's not built out, don't try to do it. So in this specific instance, I think that's a really time intensive thing, to have two people with a really specific skill set at this point in 2023. My
Yes.
kids can't read 17th and 18th century cursive.
Right.
And because we have Dutch colonial documents, we have documents written in 17th century Dutch, like it's not all English.
Right.
And so thinking about just like, from my perspective, my role in this is typically the person who's saying, so what does that mean for you? How many of those documents could you transcribe a month? It might be one. Don't try to make it 5 if it's 1. Make it 1 and do a really great job and put that one document out there once it's ready to go out there. And so I'm always interested to hear in the field what people are actually doing, to work to their capacity, and then building out that capacity. If your goal is you want to be able to do 5 documents a month, how are you actually doing that? We have more questions. Let's see. Oh, Leah popped in and said she wanted to share another webinar that Jordan presented for DHPSNY that does a deeper dive into consider the source, which is awesome. So check that out. And Kathleen says, yes, the human eye on cursive is still the best. So
I would also suggest too, retired individuals, especially people who did librarians, historians, archivists who did this kind of work, a lot of times do want to do this kind of thing. So they're a great resource in your community if you have that and you do have documents you need transcribed. I would also say if a teacher asks for a specific document to be transcribed, that might be one that you want to start with. Don't have to do them all, but if a teacher's like, oh, I'd really like to use this, but I need it transcribed, and a lot of the younger teachers don't read cursive, and then, and again, it is a time consuming task, right? So I think that's, the other big piece of that. So, but there are people out there in the community who do enjoy doing these kinds of things. So.
Yes. So I said it when we were, we open it up for questions for Levada, and I'll say it again. If anything occurs to you, if you would like to continue the conversation, we'll share some contact information at the end of our time together today. My sort of curiosity and question for everybody here is, like, where are you with this? And, what's your organization doing in terms of accessible collections, but also using an anti-racist lens to develop their accessible collections. So I'm always interested to hear about that. I think what we'll do is, if you have questions, keep putting them in the chat. In the meantime, I am going to share my screen again because we've got some next steps and action items for you that are going to help us keep this work moving forward for ourselves and our organizations. So first of all, We always want to know your feedback. Jordan talked a ton about feedback is how they do their continuous improvement. Us too, that's how we do it. Leah will put a post-session survey link in the chat. We invite you to do a continued learning activity at the end of each of these programs. The continued learning activity we're going to invite you to do this month is to check out, consider the source, go in there and like get a feel for it. I used to be a social studies teacher. I'm not a teacher anymore. I used to be like a working historian. Now I'm a consultant who does like process and strategy work. But this was so fun for me. It was like, even if this isn't directly what you do, I guarantee you, you will get a lot out of this. So go in there and like get your hands in there and like shake stuff up a little bit. And then talk with your team about how your organization can make parts of its collections more accessible using anti-racist approaches. So, you know, your team could be anybody. It could be staff, volunteers, your board, whoever it is that you're interested in working with on developing an accessible collection. Go talk to them about like, how did Consider the Source do it? How can we make our own version of that? So that's what we want you to do for continued learning activity. And also, we would love to see you at our next dialogue, November 9th at 2 o'clock. We do them online. And the dialogues are different than our webinars. We don't record them, and we have a whole group conversation, and we have small group conversations around some specific stuff. And in November, we will be talking with folks from the Northern Slavery Collective and using that as an example as a framework for inclusive history. So if your site or organization has any tie to enslavement, this is a great place for you. If you are looking for how do people create inclusive histories, this is a great framework. So we would love to see you on November 9th. And I'm going to ask Jordan, any last words? Any last words from our co-facilitator today about anti-racist approaches to collections accessibility?
I would just say it's not as hard as I think a lot of people think it is. And I think what Lavada said at the very beginning of her talk, relax. Like, you know, this is a history that needs to be out there. So, you know, and a lot of all these, there's many different histories, right, that I feel like people are hesitant to put out there because they're afraid it's you know, not appropriate, or, you know, that they're not going to do it the right way. Well, you don't know until you start having the conversation about how to put it out there. I mean, I'm not from a lot of those communities that I am working hard to make their stories available. So I have to be very conscious of that, but you can do it. And often, like here, I'm the only person who is doing it. So I have to make sure that, you know, I mean, as far as the education side goes, I mean, there's other people in the archives, but I have to make sure that, you know, I'm doing it in a responsible way, but not being afraid to do it. Because if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. So if you have things in your collection, you're that person, don't be afraid to do that. And I would also say, if you really want to make things available to educators and you don't have the capacity within your organization, we make it very easy on Consider the Source. I have a Google folder. You drop your images in, you drop whatever metadata you have that goes with the images, and I have an intern here who can upload them to Consider the Source. So if you do have some things at your local repository that you would like to get out there to educators, feel free. You can email me, you know, and we can put it up on Consider the Source. So just know that that's an option for outreach if you don't have the staff or the capacity to do that.
So can I just say this might be like my favorite takeaway is this always like working smarter, not harder, that we already have this platform to do this work. And if your capacity is literally that you can send it to Jordan, do it. Like that makes your collection that much more accessible. Jordan, how can people get in touch with you if they want to participate in that, or if they have a question that they think of after this?
Sure. So it's easy. They make it easy. Jordan.jace@NYSED, NYSED.gov. And I can put that in the chat as well. So everybody has it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Leah, are you around to say how people can get in touch with DHPSNY if they have questions or if they want resources?
Yes. So we have both a newsletter that folks can sign up for on our website. And also, if you have any questions that you would like to ask the team directly, you can find all of our emails on our website as well under our staff page. And you can also send an email to info@dipsny.org, and that'll kind of go to all of us to pick through.
Awesome. Thank you. And for ARIA Strategies, you can find us at our website, ariastrategiesllc.com. And you can message us at info@ariastrategiesllc.com. We do these programs with DHPSNY every other month. We are finishing up our 2023 program year, November 9th. We hope to see you there. And then we have a lot of really great stuff planned for 2024. So thanks everybody for your time. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Lavada. Thanks, DHPSNY, New York State Archives and Library. As always, you all are amazing partners. I'm so delighted to have seen so many familiar faces and names in our attendees today. And if you need anything, reach out. Take great care of yourselves, and we will see you in November. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Have a good day, everyone.